The evening lights of downtown Chicago shimmered through the restaurant windows, creating a soft golden glow on the polished wooden tables. The dinner rush had just begun, and the sound of clinking glasses, murmured conversations, and laughter filled the air. Emily moved quickly between tables, balancing trays of steaming dishes and refilling glasses with practiced ease. She wore her black and white uniform neatly, her dark hair tied back in a bun, and a polite smile on her face that never seemed to fade, even when she was tired. To most people, Emily was just another waitress, quiet, efficient, and kind. But beneath her calm expression, she carried dreams much bigger than her little apartment and long night shifts. There was a piano in the corner of the restaurant, a beautiful glossy one that no one ever played. Every time Emily walked past it, her heart gave a small ache. Once upon a time, that piano had been her world. Music had been her escape, her voice, her secret joy. But life had other plans, and now she only played melodies in her mind while carrying plates to table 5 or 6. Her day had started early that morning like every other day. She had woken up to the sound of her alarm and the hum of traffic outside her window. The small clock on her nightstand read 6:30 a.m., and the city was already awake. She got dressed quickly, tying her hair and putting on her worn-out shoes. There was little time for breakfast, just a quick sip of coffee before she hurried to catch the bus. As she looked out the window during the ride, she often imagined her fingers gliding over piano keys again, playing the songs she used to love. But those were just thoughts she kept tucked away, safe in the corners of her heart. By the time she reached the restaurant, the smell of roasted garlic and fresh bread greeted her. She tied her apron and started setting tables. There was comfort in routine, in folding napkins, polishing silverware, greeting customers with a smile. Still, there were moments when she wondered if anyone ever looked at her and saw more than just the waitress. Sometimes she caught people's eyes for a second too long and quickly looked away, afraid they might see the sadness she tried to hide behind her polite grin. As the restaurant grew busier, Emily kept moving, delivering food, clearing plates, taking orders. Her coworkers liked her because she never complained. Even when her feet ached or customers were rude, she had learned long ago that kindness often mattered more than pride. The manager, Mr. Roberts, trusted her to handle difficult guests because she had a calmness that made people feel at ease. But no one there knew that when she went home each night, she sometimes cried softly, missing the sound of piano music that used to fill her small apartment before she had to sell her keyboard to pay rent. That night felt like any other. The usual crowd came in, couples celebrating anniversaries, business people in suits, families sharing laughter over pasta and wine. Emily worked her way through the tables with grace, memorizing orders, keeping track of special requests. The piano sat silently in the corner, a lonely piece of art that caught her eye every now and then. Its surface gleamed under the warm lights, and sometimes, when the restaurant was empty at closing time, she would run her fingers gently across the keys, without pressing them, just to feel the smoothness under her skin. It was enough to remind her of who she once was, a girl who dreamed of playing on big stages, not just serving those who dined near one. Her co-workers often talked about their weekend plans or new clothes they wanted to buy. Emily mostly listened, nodding and smiling. She didn't talk much about herself because her story was too heavy for small conversations. Her mother's illness had changed everything. There had been hospital bills, extra shifts, sleepless nights, and in the end, a quiet acceptance that dreams sometimes had to wait. So she learned to keep her heart steady, to find pride in doing her job well. Even when no one noticed, the clock ticked toward 8, and the dinner crowd kept growing. The restaurant's chatter blended with the soft background music from the speakers. Emily weaved through the maze of tables like a dancer, always careful, always smiling. At one point, she glanced again at the piano and imagined herself sitting there, playing something beautiful that could hush the noise around her. For a brief second, she saw it so clearly. The soft lights, the silence, the way her fingers would move. Then a customer called her name, and the vision vanished like smoke. She hurried over with the same gentle tone she always used, taking another order, another drink request, another moment slipping quietly into routine. Little did she know, that very piano, the one she passed by every night, was about to change everything. Fate was patient, waiting for the right moment to remind her of who she really was, and that moment was coming sooner than she ever imagined. The restaurant was glowing that night, the golden lights reflecting off the wine glasses. laughter floating across the air like soft music. It was one of those evenings when everything felt alive. The hum of conversations, the clatter of silverware, and the gentle tunes playing in the background. Emily moved between the tables with her usual grace, unaware that tonight was about to change her life forever. Around 7:30, a group of men entered the restaurant, their voices loud, their energy filling the room even before they sat down. They were dressed in expensive suits, their watches gleaming, their confidence unshakable. Among them was Richard Foster, a name that meant something in the city and a self-made millionaire known for his charm, his arrogance, and his strange sense of humor. He was the kind of man people admired and envied at the same time. Someone who could make you laugh and insult you in the same breath. Richard didn't believe in quiet evenings or modest celebrations. Wherever he went, he made sure people noticed. The hostess led the group to the largest table near the center, the one with the perfect view of the restaurant and the silent piano in the corner. Richard took the seat facing the room as if he owned it, and ordered a bottle of the most expensive wine without even looking at the menu. His friends joked, laughed, and teased each other, their voices blending into a wave of noise. Emily approached their table, her smile polite but careful. She had seen men like this before, confident, loud, and used to getting their way. Still, she treated them like every other customer, with respect and patience. "Good evening, gentlemen," she said softly. Holding her notepad, Richard glanced at her, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. He could tell she was shy, maybe nervous. "Evening, sweetheart," he said with a smirk. "We'll start with your best bottle of wine, and maybe a smile that's not on the menu." His friends laughed loudly. Emily's cheeks turned a faint pink, but she didn't lose her composure. She simply nodded and said, "Of course, sir," before walking away to place the order. As she disappeared into the kitchen, Richard leaned back in his chair. "She's too serious," he said. "Someone should make her loosen up a little." One of his friends chuckled. "She looks like she could use a good joke." Richard's eyes wandered across the room until they landed on the piano in the corner. An idea formed in his mind, playful at first, then sharper. "Maybe we'll get her to play something," he said with a grin. His friends looked at him curious. "She's a waitress, not a musician," one of them said. Laughing, "Exactly," Richard replied. "That's the point." Meanwhile, Emily returned with the wine, carefully pouring it into their glasses. She could hear fragments of their conversation, but ignored them, focusing on her work. She had learned to tune out laughter that wasn't meant for her. But Richard's voice carried, low and teasing. "So tell me," he said, "you ever play the piano?" Emily looked up, surprised. Her eyes flicked toward the piano and then back at him. "Not anymore," she replied quietly. Richard leaned forward, resting his chin on his hand. "Not anymore," he repeated. "So you did once?" "A little," she said, trying to smile politely. "But that was a long time ago." Her tone was gentle, almost apologetic. She turned to leave, but Richard's voice stopped her. "Come on, sweetheart. Play us a tune," he said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. The laughter at his table grew. Emily froze for a moment. Her heart skipped a beat, not because of fear, but because those words awakened something she had buried for years. "I really can't," she said softly. But Richard wasn't done. "Oh, come on. It's just for fun," he said, grinning. "We could use some entertainment." His friends nodded, egging him on, the wine making them bold. A few nearby customers turned their heads, sensing something interesting unfolding. Emily felt a mix of embarrassment and confusion. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor and escape their laughter. But something in her stopped her from walking away. Maybe it was pride, maybe defiance, maybe the tiny spark of the girl she used to be. The girl who once believed in herself. The restaurant's chatter seemed to fade, replaced by the soft hum of the air conditioner and the clinking of glasses. Richard leaned back, still smiling, unaware that his joke was about to backfire in the most unforgettable way. Emily took a deep breath, her heart thumping hard. Her coworkers watched from behind the counter, whispering nervously, unsure if she would go along or refuse. Finally, she set down her tray, her hands trembling slightly. "If it will make you happy, sir," she said in a calm, almost steady voice, "I'll play something." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Richard laughed, delighted. "That's the spirit," he said, raising his glass. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have ourselves a show." As Emily walked slowly toward the piano, Every step felt like walking into her past. Her hands felt heavy, her throat dry. But there was something electric in the air. People turned to watch, curious, expecting a clumsy performance or a few broken notes. But what they didn't know, what even Emily didn't fully realize yet, was that this joke was about to become one of the most beautiful moments of her life. And for the first time in years, as her fingers hovered above the keys, she felt alive again. The soft lights of the restaurant flickered gently as Emily approached the piano. The sound of her footsteps echoed in the quiet that had suddenly taken over the room. Moments ago, laughter filled the air, but now every eye was on her. Even the waiters stopped moving for a second. Holding their breath, Richard leaned back in his chair, smiling as if he had just arranged the night's best entertainment. He didn't mean to be cruel, not exactly. He just wanted to amuse his friends. But his voice carried that sharp edge of arrogance that came from never being told no. Emily stood beside the piano, her hands resting on the back of the wooden bench. It looked almost sacred under the warm light, untouched, elegant, quiet. She stared at the keys for a moment, and memories came rushing back like a tide. Her old music teacher's face, her mother clapping softly at the end of her first recital, the late nights she'd spent practicing until her fingers hurt. Her throat tightened, but she pushed the emotions away. This wasn't the time for remembering. This was a joke to everyone else, and she knew it. "Come on, then," Richard called out with a grin. "Don't keep us waiting." His friends laughed again, some leaning forward with interest, others ready to record the moment on their phones. To them, it was harmless fun, but to Emily, it felt like being pushed onto a stage she wasn't ready to stand on. Still, she pulled out the piano bench and sat down slowly. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted the lid, revealing the shining white and black keys beneath. They reflected the lights like tiny mirrors. She hadn't touched a real piano in years. Her old keyboard at home was long gone, sold to pay medical bills, and all that was left were the memories. She took a slow breath. The room was still. Even Richard's laughter faded into silence as he watched her, waiting for the punchline to arrive. But Emily wasn't smiling. Her eyes softened. Her fingers hovered just above the keys for a few seconds. She forgot where she was. The crowded restaurant disappeared, replaced by the quiet world of her mind where music still lived. The sound of the city outside faded too, and all that existed now was her and the piano. "Play something cheerful," Richard said. Trying to fill the silence, his voice sounded less confident now. There was something about the way Emily sat, calm, focused and strangely graceful, that made him pause. The other diners leaned in, their curiosity growing. The waitress who took their orders was now the center of attention. Emily pressed her first key. A single soft note, it hung in the air, trembling like a whisper. Then another followed and another. The notes began to connect, forming a melody that flowed with quiet strength. It was gentle but powerful, the kind of tune that didn't just fill a room. It filled hearts. The laughter, the chatter, the clinking of glasses, all of it vanished. Every sound was swallowed by her music. Her fingers moved faster now. Years of practice returned to her as if they had never left. Each note carried emotion, joy, pain, hope, loss, woven together in a song that felt like a story without words. The staff peeked out from the kitchen doors, their eyes wide with disbelief. Even the bartender, who had seen every kind of drama unfold in that restaurant, froze mid-motion, wiping a glass without realizing he had stopped. Richard's smile slowly faded, replaced by something he hadn't felt in a long time. Humility. He didn't understand music, not really, but he understood beauty. And what he was hearing was pure. This wasn't the performance of a nervous waitress. This was the sound of a dreamer who had been silent too long. His friends exchanged awkward glances, their earlier amusement turning into quiet respect. The melody rose higher. Emily closed her eyes for a moment, lost in the rhythm. It felt like she was telling her life story through sound. The struggles, the nights she cried alone, the hope she refused to let die. Each note sparkled like light breaking through the darkness. By the time she reached the final chords, the room was utterly silent. When the last note faded into the air, no one moved. There was a heartbeat of stillness, the kind that happens right before the world remembers how to breathe. Then, slowly, the first clap came, a single person, then another, and soon the entire restaurant erupted into applause. It wasn't the polite kind of clapping people do out of courtesy. It was real, honest, full of emotion. Some guests stood, some even whistled, Tears shimmered in the eyes of a few older diners who knew what it meant to lose a dream and find it again. Emily stood up quietly, unsure what to do. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the rush of something she hadn't felt in years. Pride. She looked up and saw Richard still sitting there, his expression unreadable. For once, the man who always had something clever to say had no words. He raised his glass slowly, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "To the waitress," he said softly, "and her magic." The crowd clapped louder. Emily smiled shyly, her eyes glistening, and gave a small nod before slipping away toward the kitchen. Behind her, the piano sat in silence again, but it wasn't the same silence anymore. It was alive now, filled with the echoes of her music, and somewhere deep inside, Emily knew that something had shifted that night. A door had reopened, a spark had returned. The joke was over, and destiny had just begun to speak. The room was still trembling with silence after the laughter had died away. Emily sat on the piano bench, her heart pounding so loudly she thought everyone could hear it. Her hands hovered over the keys, fingers shaking slightly, not from fear but from the weight of the moment. For years she had dreamed of sitting before a real piano again, but not like this, not under the curious eyes of strangers waiting to see if she would make a fool of herself. The restaurant lights shimmered softly against the polished piano. The faint hum of the air conditioner and the distant sounds of clinking glasses seemed far away now. It was as if time itself had slowed, giving her one small window to breathe, to decide. Her throat felt dry, her chest tight, but deep inside her heart, something whispered, "Play, just play, Emily." She closed her eyes for a brief moment. The noise of the crowd melted away, replaced by the echo of memories she thought she had buried. She remembered her mother's soft voice telling her she was meant for music. She remembered the tiny music room at her college, where she would play until the janitor turned off the lights. She remembered her father's old radio that never quite tuned right, but always played Beethoven. All those memories, all those melodies she had locked away, began to stir again. Her fingers touched the first key, and a soft, trembling note filled the room. It was small, hesitant, but it carried emotion, fragile, pure, honest. The sound floated in the air like a whisper. People turned their heads, expecting it to stop, but she pressed another key and another. Soon, the soft notes began to weave together, forming a gentle melody that wrapped itself around every corner of the restaurant. The noise faded, replaced by something deeper, silence mixed with awe. The melody grew stronger, her hands finding their rhythm like old friends reunited after years apart. Each note carried a piece of her struggles, her hopes, her exhaustion, her unbroken spirit. The sound was not perfect. It wasn't polished like a professional concert, but it was real. It came straight from the heart of a woman who had suffered, worked, and loved. Her music wasn't just sound, it was truth. The soft glow of the chandelier above reflected on her face. She looked peaceful now, her earlier fear replaced by calm determination. Every note she played seemed to tell a story, one of lost dreams and second chances. It was as if the piano itself had been waiting for her all this time, waiting for her touch to wake it from its silence. Around her, the restaurant was transformed. The laughter was gone, the noise of cutlery had stopped. Even the waiters froze where they stood. Every eye was fixed on her, even Richard, the man who had started this as a joke, leaned forward in his chair. His smirk had disappeared. Replaced by quiet fascination, he couldn't explain it. But something about this woman, this waitress he had teased, moved him in a way he hadn't felt in years. The music swelled, rising and falling like the tide. There were moments when her fingers flew across the keys with such speed and grace that people forgot to breathe. Then it would slow, becoming soft again, delicate, almost like a whisper to the soul. Some guests closed their eyes, feeling the notes instead of hearing them for a few magical minutes. The busy restaurant became something sacred, a place where people remembered what beauty sounded like. Emily didn't think about the audience anymore. She wasn't playing for them, not for the millionaire, not for applause. She was playing for herself, for the part of her that had been silent too long. Every chord was a heartbeat, every melody a sigh, and as her fingers danced, tears welled up in her eyes but never fell. In that moment she was free, free from the worries about rent, from the exhaustion of double shifts, from the heavy memories that had followed her for years. The piano became her voice, and through it, She told the world who she really was. Not a waitress, but an artist. Someone who had loved music more than anything but had to give it up for survival. And now, by some strange twist of fate, it was music that had found her again. The song built to its final stretch. The chords deepened, rich and emotional, echoing through the restaurant like thunder rolling through clouds. People were frozen, eyes wide, hearts open. Richard's wine glass trembled slightly in his hand as he listened. He wasn't used to being humbled, but tonight he was. There was something almost holy about what he was hearing, something that money couldn't buy. And then, as softly as it began, the music faded. The last note lingered in the air, long and gentle, like a goodbye kiss. Emily let her hands rest on the keys, her chest rising and falling. Her eyes still closed for a second. There was nothing. No applause, no sound, only silence. The kind of silence that lives right after something beautiful ends. Then suddenly someone clapped, then another. And before she could even look up, the entire restaurant erupted into applause. People stood from their seats, cheering, whistling, some even crying. It wasn't polite or forced, and it was real. Raw admiration. Emily blinked, overwhelmed, her lips parting in disbelief. She hadn't expected this. She had only wanted to survive the joke, but instead, she had created a moment no one there would ever forget. Her eyes met Richard's across the room. He wasn't smiling in amusement anymore. He was smiling in awe. He raised his glass slightly in respect. And for once, Emily didn't look away. Her heart was racing. But it wasn't fear this time, it was pride, joy, and something she hadn't felt in years, hope. And as she stood up slowly from the piano bench, the applause still echoing around her, she realized that with one song she had changed everything. The piano had spoken again, and so had she, and neither of them would ever be silent again. The air inside the restaurant still trembled with the echo of her final note. People were clapping, cheering, some even standing to applaud. But for Emily it all sounded distant, like a dream playing out in slow motion. Her fingers still rested gently on the piano keys. Warm from the touch, her heart was racing. But not from fear this time, it was something deeper, something powerful. She looked up, and for the first time in years, she saw faces filled with admiration instead of indifference. Strangers who had never noticed her before were now watching her with tears in their eyes. Even the kitchen staff had gathered at the doorway, mouths slightly open. Her co-workers, the ones who had seen her quiet side every day, stared in disbelief. They had known her as the polite, hard-working waitress, but tonight, she had become something else, something extraordinary. For a brief moment, no one moved. It was as if everyone was afraid that the smallest sound might break the spell she had cast. Then slowly, people began to clap louder. The applause grew like a wave, rolling through the restaurant until it filled every corner. The sound was pure and full of warmth. Emily stood up from the bench, her legs trembling slightly, her cheeks flushed with emotion. She didn't know what to do, smile, bow, or just disappear, so she simply nodded shyly, her lips curving into a soft, grateful smile. A few people called out words of praise. That was beautiful, incredible, and who knew? One older woman wiped her eyes, whispering to her husband that she hadn't heard music that moving in years. For the first time, Emily wasn't invisible. She wasn't the girl who served coffee or cleared plates. She was the girl who had brought magic to the room. Richard sat frozen in his chair, his glass of wine untouched. The smirk that had once played on his face was gone, replaced by something unfamiliar, humility. He had meant it as a joke, a light-hearted dare to amuse his friends. But now he realized how wrong he had been. He watched Emily standing there, fragile yet strong, shy yet radiant, and for a long moment he couldn't speak. His friends, too, were quiet, unsure how to react. A few of them clapped awkwardly, trying to cover their embarrassment. One of them leaned over and whispered, "You really picked the wrong person to mock tonight." Richard didn't answer. Instead, he leaned forward, elbows on the table, and whispered to himself, "She's incredible." Emily stepped back from the piano, her hands clasped in front of her. She didn't want attention, she just wanted to breathe. But as she turned to walk away, people reached out to shake her hand, to thank her. Some even asked if she was a professional pianist. Her soft laugh escaped before she could stop it. "No, I just used to play," she said quietly. The crowd around her smiled, touched by her modesty. When she returned to the kitchen area, her co-workers surrounded her. "Emily, that was amazing," said Sarah, the hostess, her eyes wide with excitement. "I didn't even know you could play," another waiter said. Shaking his head, Emily blushed, brushing it off with a gentle shrug. "I haven't played in years," she said softly. "I didn't even think I still could." But inside, her heart felt like it was glowing. It was as if something that had been asleep inside her had suddenly awakened. A piece of her soul she thought was lost had come alive again. Out in the restaurant, Richard sat quietly, lost in thought. He felt a strange mixture of shame and admiration. He had seen wealth, power, success, but never something like this. There was a kind of honesty in Emily's music that money couldn't buy. It reached inside him and made him remember things he'd forgotten. Dreams, innocence, wonder. He had always believed that the world belonged to those who took what they wanted. But tonight, he had been reminded that true beauty often came from those who gave without expecting anything in return. As Emily picked up her tray and tried to return to work, Richard stood up. He walked over to the piano, still gleaming under the lights, and then looked toward her. The entire restaurant seemed to watch as he approached. When he reached her, she looked up nervously, unsure of what he would say. For a moment he didn't speak, just smiled, the softer, more genuine smile this time. "That was—" he began, then paused. "Beyond words." Emily smiled faintly. "Thank you, sir," she said, trying to move past him, but he stopped her gently. "Emily, right?" he asked. She nodded, surprised he remembered her name. "You shouldn't be serving tables," he said quietly. "You should be on a stage." His voice carried sincerity this time. No mockery, no arrogance. The same man who had started the joke now sounded almost reverent. Emily looked at him, uncertain whether to laugh or cry. "This is my job," she said softly. "I'm just doing what I can." Richard's eyes softened. "You did more than that," he said. "You reminded everyone here what real talent looks like." She didn't know how to respond, so she just smiled. "Thank you," she said again, her voice barely above a whisper. As she walked away, Richard turned back to his table, silent, thoughtful for once. The millionaire had been humbled not by money, not by power, but by a waitress and her piano that night. Long after the restaurant closed and the guests had gone home, Emily stayed behind to wipe the tables and stack chairs as usual. But her movements felt lighter, her heart fuller. She glanced once more at the piano, her reflection shining faintly on its polished surface. She smiled to herself, whispering, "Maybe this isn't the end after all." Because for the first time in years, she didn't feel trapped. She felt alive, inspired, reborn, and though she didn't know it yet, that performance was just the beginning of something far greater. For a long moment after Emily stopped playing, the restaurant was completely silent. It was the kind of silence that didn't feel empty but full of wonder, emotion, and something deeper that words couldn't reach. People sat frozen in their seats, staring at her as if they had just witnessed something sacred. Even the waiters, who had seen countless evenings come and go, stood motionless near the walls, their trays hanging loosely in their hands. Then, like a spark igniting a flame, a single clap echoed through the air. It came from a young man near the window, his eyes still shining from the music. A second later, another person joined, and then another. Soon the entire restaurant erupted into applause, a wave of sound that crashed through the quiet. It wasn't the shallow kind of applause given to performers out of politeness. It was real and raw and alive, the kind that came straight from the heart. People stood up from their seats, cheering, whistling, even wiping away tears. Some held their hands to their chests as if trying to hold on to the feeling Emily's music had given them. The energy in the room had shifted completely. Moments ago they had been chatting, laughing, eating without much thought. Now they were united by something they didn't even understand. A shared sense of awe. It was as if, for just a few minutes, Emily had reminded everyone what beauty sounded like. Emily stood beside the piano, her hands trembling slightly. Her face glowed under the soft golden light, her eyes still glistening from the emotion of her performance. She didn't know what to do. She wasn't used to being seen, being admired, being celebrated. Her instinct was to bow politely and return to work. But the crowd wouldn't let her. They cheered louder, clapping until their palms turned red. It felt unreal, like she had stepped into someone else's life. At one table near the center, an older couple held hands tightly. The woman had tears in her eyes and whispered something to her husband.
"She plays like she's been through everything and still found a reason to smile," she said.
Her husband nodded silently, lost in thought. At another table, a group of young women smiled at Emily with admiration. whispering how inspiring she was. Even the manager, Mr. Roberts, stood at the entrance of the kitchen, speechless. He had always known Emily was hardworking and kind, but tonight he saw something more, something extraordinary. Richard sat at his table, still holding his glass of wine. He hadn't moved since the song ended. For the first time in years, he felt small, not in a bad way, but in a way that reminded him there were things in life greater than success or wealth. The power of pure talent, the honesty of emotion. It humbled him. He watched Emily from across the room, and he couldn't help but feel a strange warmth in his chest. The joke he had started had turned into a lesson he didn't expect to learn. When Emily finally found her voice, she whispered, "Thank you." Her words were soft, almost swallowed by the applause. But people heard them. They clapped even louder. Some even standing on their feet. Someone shouted, "Encore," while another called, "Play one more." Emily smiled nervously, shaking her head. "I really can't," she said with a shy laugh. "I think that's enough magic for tonight." The crowd laughed with her, but their admiration didn't fade. They would talk about this night for weeks, maybe even years. As the applause slowly faded, people began to return to their seats, still whispering to one another. The restaurant buzzed with excitement, like the air after a thunderstorm, charged, alive, unforgettable. Emily quietly slipped away toward the kitchen, hoping to hide from the attention. Her coworkers surrounded her the moment she stepped through the door. "Emily," Sarah, the hostess, squealed. "That was incredible. I didn't even know you could play like that." And another waiter clapped her on the shoulder, grinning. "You just turned this place into a concert hall." Emily blushed, laughing softly. "I just did what he asked me to do," she said, nodding toward the dining room. But inside, her heart was beating fast, her soul still dancing with the melodies she had played. Meanwhile, out in the restaurant, the guests couldn't stop talking. "Who is she? Does she play professionally? We should come back next week and ask her to perform again." Their words floated through the air like little sparks of admiration. Even the manager, hearing the compliments, smiled proudly. He knew this night would be good for business. But more than that, he felt proud of Emily. He saw her not as an employee anymore, but as the heart of the restaurant. Richard finally stood up, leaving a large tip on the table, but his money felt small compared to what he had just experienced. He glanced once more toward the kitchen door where Emily had disappeared. He felt a deep pull, a need to speak to her, not as a customer, but as a man who had been changed by what he saw. He walked slowly toward the back, ignoring the curious looks from his friends. When he reached the kitchen entrance, he saw Emily standing there, laughing softly with her coworkers. She looked different now, not because of her clothes or makeup, but because of the light in her eyes. She glowed with quiet confidence, like someone who had just remembered who she truly was. Richard waited for a moment before speaking, his tone humble this time. "Emily," he said gently, and she turned to look at him, surprised. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice sincere. "What I did earlier was wrong." "It was thoughtless," Emily shook her head, smiling faintly. "It's okay," she said. "If you hadn't asked me, I wouldn't have played." Her answer was simple, but it carried grace, the kind that comes from forgiveness. Richard nodded slowly. "Still, I want to make it right," he said. "You have a gift, and the world deserves to hear it." She looked at him, confused, unsure if he was joking again. But this time there was no laughter in his eyes, only honesty. He smiled almost shyly. "Let me help you get back to your music," he said. For a second she didn't answer, her mind spinning. No one had ever said something like that to her. Not in years. And in that moment, standing in her simple uniform, surrounded by the smell of food and the clatter of dishes, Emily felt something shift again. Maybe this wasn't just a strange night. Maybe it was the start of something new, something extraordinary. The restaurant had quieted down again, but the magic of that moment still lingered in the air. The guests were leaving slowly, their conversations soft, their hearts still wrapped in the memory of Emily's music. Outside, the city lights shimmered against the dark sky, and the cool night breeze drifted in through the open door. Emily stood near the counter, holding her apron in her hands, still feeling the warmth of the piano keys on her fingertips. Richard approached her carefully, this time without his confident stride or teasing smile. He looked almost uncertain, which was unusual for a man like him. Emily glanced up when she heard his footsteps, her expression polite but guarded. He stopped a few feet away, hesitated, then said softly, I didn't mean to embarrass you earlier. She smiled faintly, her voice calm. It's all right, sir. Really? She said. But Richard shook his head. No, it's not all right, he replied. I was trying to make fun of something I didn't understand. Emily looked at him quietly. Unsure how to respond, there was a pause, long and gentle, the kind that carries more truth than words. Finally, she spoke, her tone soft but firm. You don't have to apologize, because maybe it was meant to happen. Richard frowned slightly, confused. What do you mean? She sighed, her eyes distant, like she was seeing something far away. For years. I haven't touched a piano, she said. I used to play every day, every night, until my fingers hurt. Richard listened carefully, his arrogance gone, replaced by genuine curiosity. What happened? He asked. Emily hesitated, then took a deep breath. Life happened, she said simply. She looked down at her hands, tracing her fingers slowly as if remembering the way they once danced across the keys. My mom got sick when I was still studying music, she continued. She needed care and I needed to work, so I left school, took a job, and sold my piano. Her voice didn't tremble, but her eyes glistened. She always told me I'd make it someday, that people would listen to me. But after she passed away, I just couldn't play anymore. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sounds of the kitchen clinking behind them faded into the background. Richard looked at her, realizing how small his world had been compared to hers. He had spent years chasing money, deals, success. Yet he couldn't remember the last time something had moved him the way her music had. And now, hearing her story, he felt something break open inside him. Empathy, admiration, maybe even guilt. Emily gave a small, tired smile. I guess I got used to just working, she said softly. It's easier not to dream when you can't afford to lose. Her words hung in the air like the final note of a sad song. Richard swallowed hard, feeling his throat tighten. You shouldn't give up on something like that, he said. Talent like yours doesn't just disappear. She looked at him, almost amused. It doesn't disappear, she said. It just goes quiet, waiting for a reason to wake up again. Her words hit him harder than he expected. He thought about all the people he'd met, investors, business partners, celebrities, and realized none of them had ever spoken with such quiet truth. It wasn't power that made her special, it was her heart. He suddenly wished he could rewind the night and start over, not as the arrogant man who mocked her, but as the person who truly listened. He took a small step closer, lowering his voice. Emily, he said, what if I told you that you don't have to wait anymore? She looked at him, puzzled. What do you mean? I have connections, he said slowly. Music schools, studios. People who can help you. I can sponsor you if you'd let me. Emily blinked. Completely taken aback, her first thought was disbelief. People didn't just walk into your life, humiliate you, then offer to change it. She almost laughed, thinking he was joking again. But when she looked at his face, there was no trace of humor there. Only sincerity. Why would you do that for me? She asked quietly. Richard paused, searching for the right words. Because I've spent my whole life buying everything I wanted, he said. But tonight I realized something. There are things money can't buy, and your gift is one of them. Emily stared at him, her chest tightening with emotion. Part of her wanted to refuse, to protect herself from disappointment. But another part, the part that still believed in music, in destiny and second chances, wanted to say yes. She looked away for a moment, her voice trembling slightly. You really think I could start again? I don't think, Richard said gently. I know. Something in his tone made her believe him. Not because he was rich or powerful, but because for the first time, someone saw her, really saw her. Not as a waitress, not as someone who gave up, but as a musician waiting to be heard. Emily wiped the corner of her eye quickly and smiled. You don't even know me, she said softly. Richard smiled back. I know enough, he replied. I know your music. And somehow that felt like the truest thing anyone had ever said to her. The night stretched on quietly after that. The restaurant emptied, leaving only the soft hum of the lights and the faint smell of coffee. Emily walked back to the piano one last time before leaving. Her reflection shimmered on its polished surface. She reached out and touched the keys gently, a smile forming on her lips. It no longer felt like a dream she had lost. It felt like a door had opened again. Behind her, Richard stood by the entrance. Watching silently, he didn't say another word, He didn't need to because both of them knew that something had changed forever that night. A mistake had turned into a miracle, and a joke had become the start of a new beginning. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the curtains of Emily's small apartment. The golden rays touched her face gently, waking her from the best sleep she had in years. For a moment, she lay still, her mind drifting between dream and reality. Then she remembered the night before, the piano, the applause, the millionaire's unexpected kindness, and she smiled. A real smile that came from deep inside her heart. Her little apartment was quiet, the air filled with the faint aroma of coffee. On the table sat an envelope with Richard's business card inside. Along with a handwritten note, she picked it up and read the words again, slowly as if she wanted to feel each letter. "This world needs to hear your music again. Don't let it go silent." It was signed simply, R. Foster. Emily sat there for a long time, staring at the note, her heart pounding softly. It all felt too unreal, too sudden. Like life had finally decided to give her a gift after years of taking things away. She had spent so long surviving that she had forgotten what it felt like to dream. And now a single moment of courage had brought everything back. She got ready for work as usual, her apron neatly folded, her shoes polished. But something about her felt different. The mirror reflected not just a waitress anymore, but a woman who had rediscovered her fire. Her eyes sparkled with quiet confidence. Her steps felt lighter. When she walked into the restaurant that day, her co-workers greeted her with cheers and smiles. "Look who's famous now," Sarah teased. Laughing, Emily blushed, shaking her head. "Please don't start," she said with a laugh. But inside she was glowing. Mr. Roberts, the manager, called her aside. "You know," he said with a grin, "we've had 3 reservations already asking if our piano waitress is performing again." Emily laughed in disbelief. "Oh no, please, it was just one time." But he shook his head. "You moved people, Emily, don't hide from that." His words echoed in her heart, and she realized he was right. Later that week, she met Richard again. He was waiting for her outside the restaurant, leaning casually against his car, but this time, his arrogance was gone, replaced by quiet respect. "Good afternoon. Miss Emily," he greeted her warmly. She smiled shyly. "You really didn't have to come," she said. "I know," he replied. "But I wanted to." They walked to a nearby cafe, talking like old friends. Richard asked her about her life, her music, her dreams. He listened, really listened, and for once, Emily felt heard when she told him about her mother. He didn't interrupt or pity her. He just nodded, as if silently promising that her mother's faith in her wouldn't be wasted. "I made a few calls," Richard said finally, pulling out a folder. Inside were forms, brochures, and an acceptance letter. "I spoke to a music academy I sponsor downtown," he said. "They'd like to offer you a scholarship, full tuition. Private lessons, everything you need." Emily stared at the papers, her hands trembling, her throat tightened, and for a moment, she couldn't speak. "This can't be real," she whispered, her voice cracking. "It is," Richard said softly. "You earned it." Tears welled up in her eyes as she covered her mouth. All the years of hard work, of sacrifice, of late nights and lost dreams, they all rushed back at once. And now, standing in front of the man who had once mocked her, she felt something beautiful. Not revenge, not pride, but gratitude. Gratitude that life, despite its cruelty, had given her another chance. A few weeks later, Emily stood again in front of a piano, but this time it wasn't in a restaurant. It was in a bright sunlit room at the academy, surrounded by other students and a teacher who smiled warmly at her. Her fingers trembled as she touched the keys, but not from fear, from joy when she played. The music flowed like water, gentle and pure. It filled the room, wrapping everyone in its warmth. The teacher closed his eyes and said softly, "You've been away from music too long, haven't you?" Emily smiled. "Yes," she said, "but I'm home now." Meanwhile, at the restaurant, the piano no longer sat silent. Every weekend, Emily came back to play a short piece after her shift, not for money, but for love. Customers would gather around quietly, listening. Some of them didn't even eat, they just came to hear her. The same piano that had once been a joke was now a symbol of hope. Richard often sat at his favorite corner table watching quietly. He didn't interrupt, didn't boast about helping her. He just listened, smiling softly. He knew that night had changed them both. Him from a man who mocked dreams to one who believed in them, and her from a woman who thought hers were gone to one who finally lived them. Months passed, and one evening, Emily was invited to perform at a local music event. When her name was called, the crowd cheered. She walked on stage in a simple blue dress, her heart beating fast. And as she sat down before the grand piano, she whispered to herself, "This is for you, Mom." Her fingers touched the keys, and once again the room fell silent. The first note rang out, clear, beautiful, alive, and somewhere in that sound, there was everything she had ever been through: pain, love, loss, and triumph. When the final note faded, the crowd rose to their feet, just like that night in the restaurant, and Emily smiled through her tears, knowing that her mother's dream for her had finally come true. She had lost everything once, but music had found her again, and now she would never let it go. Sometimes life doesn't give you second chances right away. Sometimes it waits for the right moment, the right people, the right song, and when it finally comes, it feels just like this. Like the first note after a long silence. Like Emily at the piano, finding her voice again. Like a heart that forgot how to dream, finally remembering its tune.